Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Impact Producing Panel for the PPM Fest 2022. I am Shamika Sawyer, the founder and creative director of the Five Shorts Project here in Philadelphia. And I also supported on the Philly DA docu-series as a Philly event producer and impact producer. So today we have an awesome panel. We have with us Ted Passon, who is an award winning director, writer, producer, and video artist. He created and directed the critically acclaimed docu-series Philly DA, along with co-director Yoni Brook and producer Nicole Salazar. The series had its world premiere at the Sundance Film Festival and had its international premiere at the Berlin Film Festival, becoming the first docu-series to ever screen there. It was named one of the best TV shows of 2021 by over 10 outlets, including Time, the New York Times, Variety, and IndieWire. The series won a Peabody Award, a Gotham Award for Best Breakthrough Nonfiction Series, and the DuPont Columbia Award. Ted also directed series for Netflix, Disney, and Comcast. He is a co founder of All Ages Production, a full service film and video production company, and is a board member at the Black Star Film Festival. Welcome, Ted. Welcome. We are so excited. We're so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's good to
Yes,
see you.
it's great to see you. And up next, we have Nikki Mendez. Nikki is the founder of Mendez Advocacy and part of the Raphael and Associates Advocacy team. She is a Philly native, Puerto Rican, neurodivergent educational advocate whose lived experiences and experience as a parent to a son with special education needs drives her vision of helping to create a fully inclusive and equitable society. As founding member of the PA Inclusion Collective and the Ratner Committee for Special Education, she believes strongly in the right to a quality education, ensuring success and maximizing the potential for every student. She previously created ESEL, a project aimed at combating the school to prison pipeline in Chester, PA, Delaware County. Funded by the PADDC, and executive produced a documentary about the importance of mindfulness programming and equitable school funding. Divided attention when the children who need the most receive the least, with support from PhillyCAM. Welcome, Nikki. We are excited to have you as well.
Happy to be here.
All right, so we're just going to get into the topic of impact producing. So, from my understanding, impact producing has this added element, right? You create the documentary or the docu series with a point of view in mind, but when you add the impact producing side to it, it's more about making sure that your point of view has impact in the community and to the audience that you bring your work to. So either one, Ted or Nikki, please tell me, what are your thoughts around impact producing? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, so
Happy to go, or if you want to go, either way.
yeah, I mean, for me, as a new filmmaker, not having much experience, for me, it was the intention, right? Divided attention, intention, divided attention. The impetus behind that film was to tell the story through the lens of the children. ESEL is a program that I implemented in Chester Upland School District to combat the school to prison pipeline, and essentially combine mindfulness instruction in training for educators and the students, as well as what's called CPS, which is Collaborative Proactive Solutions. Essentially teaches teachers how to be effective problem solvers. And part of that is listening to the children. It's saying, what's up, and getting them involved in solving their problems. As an education advocate, specifically in the realm of disability and IDEA law, what I found was advocating for families with children with disabilities in communities of color was particularly challenging because it wasn't really helping anything to change the system, right? What ended up happening was we're moving kids out of the district, which costs the district a ton of money. So how do we look at systemic change? And for me, it was, well, let's give the kids the cameras and let's bring awareness to this issue, particularly on a hyper local level, to surrounding communities so that they can help shift the way that we look at the way we fund education, so that we can help close that gap and look at education and how inequitable, look at the disparities. So it was the intention, and then the goals came later. So I said, I just want to bring awareness to this and tell the story. And then through that, it became clear that we were going to tell a story through the racial equity lens and through, community grassroots organizing. The more present we were in the community with a film crew and talking to different stakeholders, the more involved I noticed they became, and the more interested, and they had more buy-in to what this story was. And that kind of sense of attention and the feeling of attention in the community, I think, was positively, like, we were received really well because it felt like it was needed at a very important time. I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on, and then of course COVID happened. So for me, impact producing was, unfortunately, because I was brand new, kind of like an afterthought, because I knew that the intention was there and the goals came as the project kind of evolved.
Yeah. And just thinking about this and everything you're saying, I was reminded by a quote from Frederick Wiseman, this documentary filmmaker. I went to this lecture that he gave, and he had kind of famously made this film called Titicut Follies that kind of exposed kind of the horrors that were going on in institutions at the time that he made it. And a lot of them were kind of shut down not long after. And, somebody in the audience was kind of crediting his film with doing that. And he was kind of like, films don't change anything. that was his feeling. They don't change anything. It was like, they bring up the ideas maybe, but everything that happens after that is beyond what the film itself is doing. And, so you could say, I think in some ways, that an impact campaign is the next step. The film maybe sparks the conversation, or the film is there for a tool to have the conversation, but the impact campaign is taking the actual steps and action to create that conversation, and then to create concrete steps to then go forward. So it kind of picks up in some ways where the film leaves off, and is like a conscious act. It's not just like a hope that something will happen, but it's a conscious next step to create something to happen. And so I think that's kind of like the difference between the two disciplines and how they maybe like butt up against each other. But I think producing a series or producing a film and producing an impact campaign are two totally different skill sets, but they're complementary for sure. And that's how we start with a story that maybe inspires a feeling, and then how you turn that into action, I think.
Nice. So I know a huge part of impact producing is basically involving the communities that you're speaking to. So what are the benefits of involving the community in your impact producing campaigns? And Nicole, we can start with you.
I mean, community buy-in, right? Like, and it's almost as if an unofficial community organizing. Like, there may be, and what we found is there were different pockets of advocacy groups all kind of talking about the same thing, but they hadn't really connected until we were in the community kind of interviewing different people from different areas, saying, oh, and then they started talking to each other. So it kind of felt like everybody was individually doing their own thing, and the film itself and us being in that community brought more grassroots efforts together. So it was like an unofficial kind of community organizing, just being there, but bringing attention to an issue.
Yeah, and there's no one who knows what the community needs more than the community itself. And and you can't like engage a community. It's not a one-sided thing. It's like you have to do it hand in hand with the community, and ideally with a conduit between the project and the community who is part of that community, and understands the needs and understands what's going on. I mean, but that was one of the interesting things about PhillyDA, was that in some ways, we were tapping, I think, a lot of different communities, because the series is so long and is able to tap into so many different topics. So it was kind of interesting to be able to do that. And the more I think communities you tap into, the more, the more similarities you see between them, the more shared needs you kind of see that maybe aren't talked about more commonly. And so there are real benefits to sometimes getting people in a room and having conversations that maybe they wouldn't have had otherwise, had something like this not, involved all of them when maybe they're used to having these conversations separately. So that can be, an added perk of doing something like this.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know for me, working as part of the event production team for PhillyDA on the impact side, the panels after we screened an episode, were just amazing because the community actually got the opportunity to respond and share their thoughts and feelings about what's happening in their lives. And at times they were able to speak truth to power, because our last panel, we had the DA there, the Philadelphia DA there, and we had some members in the audience who really wanted to talk to him and share, things that they felt he needed to focus on more. And he was open to having that conversation. So in some ways, these impact producing campaigns opens up opportunities for community members to maybe learn more and even talk to individuals that they wouldn't necessarily have, a chance to talk to anywhere else. So in thinking of that, I know a huge part of impact producing is connecting with the advocacy groups, if I can get the word out. What is that like? Like, how do you connect with these groups, and how do you get them on board to be supportive with what you're working on?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, okay, for us, I could say, that process started, and I think it makes sense for any filmmaker, if you're making a film about any topic, even if it's one that you feel you're familiar with, there are certainly experts and people who, study that, whatever it is, they study it, they look at it, they live and breathe it, they're working on policy around it. And, it always makes sense to engage those people when you're making the project, just from the sake of getting the story right, just from the sake of educating yourself, understanding all the angles of the issue. Maybe there's something you haven't thought about before. And so, we kind of started those partnerships at that stage, and kind of realizing that there were people who knew these things much better than we did. And we needed to check ourselves. You also want to make sure that, like, in the edit, you're not accidentally, cutting something out that changes the context in a way that you don't understand. And so, to have these people kind of throughout the process, kind of advising you and helping you, is super helpful. And it just makes the project better. But then at that point, when the project's finished, then you've gotten to know each other, you've had time together, and you kind of already got this partnership. And then it makes, I think, taking the next step that much faster in a way. And, they get ideas about, like, oh, who'd be great to talk to is this person and this. And, in some ways, the impact campaign, at least for our project, almost like couldn't not happen, because it already felt like we had so much in place, so many different organizations who saw a need for this in their community or with their audiences, that it really just kind of happens very organically. And then, of course, the process is that much better because they're involved. So
yeah, I would add, I mean, we had a similar experience, right? So we'd interview some person that had a very clear was really aligned with what our goal was the film. And it's like, oh, who else you need to speak to? So we were able to connect and bring more folks together. But I do want to add, it goes back to what Ted was saying, in the beginning of this, the impact campaign kind of, it's after the film. And so really, when all of the advocates we found in those screenings, they felt, because we were careful with the story, they were the storytellers, and we told their story, they felt like this was their film. So they were just more involved in saying, okay, I have the screening, I want to screen it over here, I'm going to invite this person. They became kind of the people on the ground pushing this advocacy work forward with the film. So it feels to me that the film itself is like a tool for the advocacy groups. So, they really use it to bring more awareness to the issues at hand. So yeah, in regards to, like, how do you connect with them? It was a lot of for me, I mean, for lack of a better term, pounding the pavement, I was in Chester all of the time. I was in that school. I was talking to them. I was saying, this is what it's going to look like. And you have to build the trust. And then with that trust, then they'll connect you to somebody else, and they will open up their arms to say, who else I really want you to talk to. And oftentimes it's people that are kind of stakeholders that have, ancillary or parallel issue, so for example, in Divided Attention, we interviewed someone who was really heavily involved in prison reform. So it's like, well, we can talk about school to prison pipeline with that, and because he was in the community, he had a direct relation. So that became part of like the greater group of advocacy groups that we were involved with in the production of the film.
Yeah, I think there's also something you're making me think of too, which I think it also stems back to like, you're interviewing people or you're featuring their lives or following them around. And there is something in the storytelling, which is also like, I think it's another good example of like, maybe not taking cheap shots at people when you're constructing the story, and kind of leaning into the complication, leaning into what's difficult about things, where you can. I mean, I guess there's some things that really aren't that complicated, but for the most part, yeah, like creating everybody, portraying everybody as a human, as giving their best argument, because I think, something we found is, we've followed so many different kinds of people who often did not agree with each other and probably would never have voluntarily been in the same room with each other otherwise. And, luckily we found that everybody felt fairly portrayed. They felt like their voice was, was shown correctly and fairly. And so I think it allowed us to create events and different community outreach days and projects where like these people would come out and have a conversation that maybe wouldn't have before, or would be willing to listen to each other because they kind of saw them in the series in a new light, and they maybe saw them as in a more human way than they had before. And so maybe they dropped their guard around each other a little bit. And so that was really exciting to see, these kind of people coming together sometimes that I think maybe normally wouldn't have. So.
Yeah, I do think that is like the highlight of all of this. And it gives you all the opportunity to really hear from the community and see how your series or film has impacted them. And sometimes you learn a lot just from sitting in on the conversations, and you learn about different people who may be someone you can connect with in the future if you decide to continue on that subject matter. I'm just wondering, one thing, when you connect with advocacy groups, right? When your film, your docuseries is done, do you then have like a private screening with the groups first and make sure like they're okay with how they're portrayed, or do you just put it out there and just wait for the feedback?
For us, it depends. I mean, we had a lot of people in our series, so in some ways we knew there wasn't going to be, because of COVID, we would have just maybe had a big screening, invited everybody, but of course we couldn't do that. So we had to pick and choose a little bit just to make our deadlines. And so our metric was basically like, if somebody has a certain amount of screen time, I kind of forget how many minutes we like crossed it off at, but if somebody had a certain amount of screen time, then we would invite them in for a private screening before the edit was finished, show it to them, let them give us any notes. Sometimes there was nothing, sometimes there was feedback, and we're like, oh, you're right. We should, that we understand how we edited that could come off as incorrect if someone didn't know XYZ. So why don't we put that in there just to be safe? And that would happen every now and then. So yeah, we would do that. Cause also, you want to respect that, like for a lot of people, putting themselves on camera, especially if they're letting you into their lives and doing something, very personal, it's a big risk for them. It's a huge risk. And so I think any documentary filmmaker needs to respect that and, give them the courtesy to at least, see how they're being portrayed, to discuss it. And to, that's kind of what they deserve for being so generous, because most people aren't going to do that. And it's only because of those people that documentary exists as an art form at all. So,
Right.
yeah, so they deserve it.
Yeah, we were very careful with the children stories because we gave them cameras, and we had a ton of footage of them talking from their homes, and we had some interviews where there was some trauma revealed. So we were very careful with that, and we made sure that they were okay with what was being portrayed in the film. For the private screenings, we did hold a couple pre-private screenings, mostly just, I think, luckily for us, coincidentally, it kind of aligned with the fair funding lawsuit that was happening in Harrisburg at the time. So there were a lot of advocacy groups that were suing the Board of Education for their inequitable school funding, right? So they're trying to change the Constitution. So that was a really ideal time to say, we have this film, let's do a private screening and invite not just the cast and stars of the film, but also legislators and key stakeholders that had vested interest in this issue of school funding. So with that, they were kind of not just alone in the private screening, but they were observing and having a conversation with other stakeholders that had school funding as like a special interest of theirs. So, and then we were able to get some feedback, and luckily for us, a lot of the people that were featured in the film were very happy with the way that they were portrayed. So no, they didn't have any pushback. But for us, it was the children. We just wanted to make sure that their stories, that they were okay with the way that we were portraying their story.
Nice. I mean, I can just imagine, because kids don't really have a filter. So it's like they'll just record and record and record. And yeah, it is that responsibility, just making sure with the parents that, is this okay? Can we share this? Do you feel comfortable with this? So wow, that's amazing. So one more thing I have to ask is, was there any pushback from any advocacy groups who may not have agreed with your series or your film? Did any of you experience that?
So one of the issues that I think we have experienced a little bit of pushback, and it's more of the nature of the topic, is charterization, right? So charter schools is a very controversial topic. And what we kind of highlighted was how charter schools essentially, racialize their presence. Chester Upland School District has the most charter schools, arguably, in the state, I believe, at least, and some other states. So, why is that happening, right? Because we know that is a historically underfunded, resourced kind of community. And there are a lot of individuals that believe in choice in that community. So, the fact that the film ended up leaning against charterization, mostly because they were looking to privatize education, it leaned that way. And after the fact, with some screenings, there was the district loved. We have a new administration in the Chester Upland District, so they were looking to kind of, feature the film in their Clipper TV, and there was some pushback because charter schools are still there. There are still a lot of families that are in support of charters in that community. So we did get some pushback in the availability of the film to within the community due to that issue. But overall, as a whole, I think we walked the line really well, and everyone was pretty happy with it. But I did notice that we had some pushback about that.
Interesting.
Yeah, we had kind of a loose-knit advocacy group, maybe a less formal advocacy group, I would say, that kind of let us. We heard early on, when they heard about the project we were making, that they were very skeptical about how accurate it would be, and about what kind of angle it might take, and what kind of damage it might do to the progressive prosecutor movement. And it was a group that we hadn't been working with very directly. So in some ways, there was some like urban legends that I think had developed around the series, and so we did do like a kind of like a private preview screening just before the Sundance premiere of the first couple episodes, just for some folks, just so they could see like what we were actually doing. And it's one thing to say, oh no, trust us, like we're totally doing it this way, and and another thing to actually prove it. So I think totally fair to them, because again, we're telling a story in a world that they live in every day. That is extremely important to them, so thankfully, after they saw the episodes, it got, I think we a lot of fears were put aside. But yeah, there was a little bit of that in the beginning, but not since the series came out, thankfully.
Well, that's good. Awesome. So we're going to move on to talking about strategies for impact producing. So what are some of the strategies that either you use to get connected with advocacy groups?
Well, I guess I would say, like, kind of what I was saying in the beginning about, like, when you find your experts early on, you find your experts that you're going to consult with for your project, people who are in the world, they know it really well. Um, at the end of the day, they're the folks who know the community better than you do.
Mhm.
And, so making relationships with them, building trust with them, does open doors. And then obviously when you're filming the project as well, you're meeting people also, you're meeting the subjects, you're meeting people in their world. And that's also part of the same thing. Um, and then, and I do think it does make sense to be thinking like on different stratas, like, okay, like who are the groups that we would, look at locally. If it's a bigger issue than just a specific local issue, then okay, then who do we look at maybe the state level? Who do we look at the national level? Who are the different organizations that, that operate at that level on these issues, and bringing them in early, so that one, you can get the benefit of their experience to help make the project better. But then two, you already have that relationship in place so that when you're starting to, put together your impact campaign, you have them on board. And usually you're kind of doing them at the same time. Usually you kind of know that while you're making your story, that you're tackling XYZ issues. And so you have a certain audience, you have a certain, realm, a certain group that wants to hear about these issues, that you want to find because they're going to be interested in the story. And so in some ways it kind of happens, you're putting together your plan as you're in the process of filming, as you're in the process of editing. And you actually need to be thinking about it early on. I mean, a lot of funders, even when you're fundraising for the project to begin with, will ask you, what is your impact campaign? You've got to have something to say. So even in the very beginning of the project, you kind of, I think a lot of documentary grant proposals are a little fake it till you make it, but so you come up with something that you think sounds like a great idea and you just put it in the application, and then you're kind of investigating that as you go forward and kind of fine tuning, oh, well, that wouldn't work, but this would be better. Or what if we do this? And what about this group I didn't know about? And you're kind of changing it as you go. And then often, you're even fundraising for your impact campaign before you've even finished the project, and so like a lot of these things are happening simultaneously. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add to that because I think that covers pretty much everything. Ted is an expert, but I would say that we had difficulty kind of securing some interviews, particularly like with the school district, and I took full transparency. I just sent them the proposal, and I would talk to them. I would be there, and then I'd say, here's what I propose. This is what the funder is looking to fund. So they knew so essentially our impact campaign was written down, our goals, our intentions, and I just sent it to the potential groups that I want them to be involved with. So they understood that, we had no other agenda but what was here on paper. So that was also another strategy that we used that actually worked. And that's how we were able to get the superintendent and receiver to sit with us for an interview.
Interesting. So I'm just wondering, like, how does all this come together for as the research and figuring out what groups to connect with and how to connect with the community? Is there a team of people that come together and do this? Can you talk a little bit more about that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, so okay, I think for us there was two, and this is, I think, is pretty common. There's kind of two phases of it. So it's like in the beginning, as you're getting to, unless you came to this with already a bunch of expertise, if you're kind of getting to know the world, then you're hearing about different organizations. As we said before, you talk to one and then they're like, oh, you should talk to this person. It's like, no, you got to talk to this person. They're the person, and then you kind of get to know everybody in the landscape. Eventually, slowly but surely, after talking to people and kind of meeting people, you start to see who's out there. And then at a certain point, when you try to figure out, like, okay, but how would we actually roll this out? Partly you do that in conversation with these different groups and try to get their ideas. What do they think, would be done? Kind of weigh that against your budget and then figure out what makes sense. But then also part of that process is bringing on an impact producer and someone who has experience kind of doing this. And there are people, in the world who specialize in this, such as yourself. And so yeah, when you're, when you're getting closer and closer to that, campaign needing to start, at a certain point, based on however much money you've been able to raise, look around see who's available as an impact producer, and bring them into the process to start kind of like leading the charge on like, what is that strategy? How exactly are we going to do it? Like, okay, we think we want to work with XYZ group. We have X amount of dollars. What do we think is possible to do given all this stuff? And then come up with a plan, have them kind of like lead the charge in terms of organizing it, producing it, managing it. Because chances are you're still running around with no time trying to finish the project. And so it really is just like a whole full-time job for somebody else to take on. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our experience was a little unique because, it was interesting because so the intention was to create a film from the lens of the children and their experience in accessing this program that was in their school, right? And then just having them be the focus while this kind of chaos of what was going on within the district was kind of surrounding them. So they were like the center. We're trying to center them, but it was a challenge getting connected with the parents. We had COVID, like getting these release signs. So we were up against the clock. And we only had a short amount of time to film this filming. I think we shot from February to June was really the bulk of our footage that we got. And we were limited on budget. So we couldn't afford to bring on an impact producer. So I took on the role of kind of all of that. Things would I'm like, okay, well, we have this lawsuit that's happening, and we have a group that started that's, out of the Black Lives Matter, Delco Resists, and they're outside of the courthouse on this day, fighting for equitable funding. Like, we got to get a camera crew over there. So while we were trying to kind of get everything organized to get all of the children that we were going to feature, we knew that there was a story around that. So we were just kind of in those spaces. So we're like, okay, get there. And then with that, we started connecting with more individuals and then saying, okay, well, here's what we're trying to document and capture here. And then that kind of organically evolved into bringing in all of those folks and really mobilizing that community because we were there in that space.
Interesting. Nikki, can you talk a little bit about who the other team members were who were working with you, since you did this impact producing basically on your own? So who else were you connected with, and how did you learn about the different events happening in the community so you can send cameras there?
Well, PhillyCAM, they were my production team, right? So I had Sergio over PhillyCAM, as well as Laura Doach, and Ariel was my person that was going to be going in, and a youth mentor, working with the children, but we couldn't get the release assigned. So that was a little bit delayed. And then Stephanie Ramones, which was our director. So that was our team. Like, that was just, us five was the production team. And we would meet weekly to talk about, what are the barriers this week that we have to face? How do we get around this? What do we do here? And for the most part, I was the recipient of what was going on in Chester, because we were also it was COVID. So we were all kind of like in our own respective spaces saying, okay, well, how do we tap into what's happening there? And we knew that there was a little bit of groundswell, a little bit of movement around this equity issue because of the fair funding formula kind of a lawsuit that was in the background. So I would get the information, I'd bring it back to the team, I'd say, how do we get there? I think we need to kind of cover this. So it was a collaborative effort. I mean, PhillyCAM was just amazing in helping to kind of pull all this together and really guide me to wrap my brain around what this meant. Like, how do we film, like, I had no language to refer to because I'm not a filmmaker, but I just knew that there was something there that was really important to say. And I thought, if I can get this, instead of, the impetus behind this really was I had did a screening for Ross Green's The Kids We Lose, which was about restraint and seclusion. And we screened it in Lower Merion on the main line and in Chester. And in both of those screenings during the Q&A, there was a white woman in the audience that said, well, those are poor kids. They don't look like my kids. And it just kind of stood with me. Like, how do we make a film that we're not preaching to the converted, but really help to shift minds? And that stayed with me the whole time. So I wanted to make sure that we're telling a story that can resonate across communities. So it was just kind of being in those spaces and creating something that would speak to that neighboring district to say, oh, I didn't know that was going on in my own backyard. What can I do? And they'll notice that, Carol Kazim, who was one of our advocates in the film and community organizers is now running for state representative, right? So now neighboring communities could say, I want to support her because she's doing that in Chester. So some of that I thought was just, I mean, for me, that's how this became an impact campaign, to really help to shift minds.
Nice, nice. I really love that you brought up the fact of, sometimes when you do this, you feel like you're preaching to the choir because it's all people who are already behind you. But how do you create uh, messaging or, what are your plans for reaching people who may not see this as an issue that impacts them directly? How do you get them to want to get involved? So I'm happy you brought that up because that's very important as part of this as well. And moving on with that, I know both of you were filming during COVID. So, how were you able to connect with communities and build power behind your project with the communities during COVID?
Well, all of our impact events in the beginning were virtual. That was partly. We did have the benefit, I will say, in the beginning of having kind of the reach and resources of PBS behind us on the project. So PBS, and specifically Independent Lens, which is the part of PBS that we were featured on. They do have like a whole network in place, obviously, because there's PBS stations all around the country. And, so they did kind of have, I mean, thankfully, they kind of started the ball rolling for us, and they set up a lot of virtual events all around the country that we did based around the rollout of the broadcast. And they really did a lot of the heavy lifting there because, they could go to those communities. They already had, people there to say, like, what does your community want? What is the specific, way to talk about these issues that is most important to them? Who are the local people who, we bring? So we would always have, folks from the community there, along with people from the series, and all be in the conversation together. And in some ways, that was nice because it created a little bit of buffer for us. So we were able to start an impact campaign virtually, and then we kind of figured we could at least start. We had a one partner organization called the Inside Out program, which was started here in Philadelphia, and they basically teach classes in colleges all around the world, and they're all classes about the criminal justice system. And half of the students are, enrolled students in the university, and half of the students are currently incarcerated in each class, and they kind of put them together. And so they had a network also all around the world at all these different institutions. And so we did virtual events with them. And we also, were working with groups that worked with law students in different law schools. So we were doing also virtual visits there too. And then as things went on, we started to finally get to a place where we could think about doing things in person. But we had a whole several in-person components of the campaign that we had been trying to put together, both in Philly and both, outside of Philly. And a lot of them kept having to get pushed back. And then eventually we finally got to the place where we could do it. But, it was slow going. But actually, I will say, going back to PBS, that is certainly one perk of working with them, is that they think about an impact campaign. It's part of how they do things, especially at Independent Lens. They're really focused on that. Excuse me. And there are a lot of distributors and streamers out there who it is not part of their model. They're like, oh, you want to do an impact campaign? Go ahead.
Yes.
Like, God bless, but we're not going to fund it. We're not going to help you.
Right.
Go ahead. So in some ways, that is something to think about, how important the impact campaign is to your project, because there are some distributors that it might not be worth talking to or meeting with because they're not gonna help. So.
Right. That's like a whole nother conversation when you start talking about that part, right?
Yes.
So, Nikki, for you, how did you pull it off?
So, I mean, I think what we found, I think most of us experienced this during COVID, is that the virtual aspect of connecting actually opened up the doors to, tapping into other individuals that wouldn't typically come to an in-person. So I think there was a big silver lining in all of that, in having, like Ted, most of the campaign was virtual. We were having a lot of virtual screenings, but I think people that showed up to those wouldn't typically go to it in person. And then also, as a disability advocate, I think it becomes more accessible to a greater, larger community. So everything was virtual. And a lot of our filming was virtual, right? Because we were working with kids and they were not in school. So, and we had to work around that as filmmakers to say, how engaging is, look, and a lot of times the kids didn't want to turn on their cameras. Right. So do we keep that? So, it was a really interesting kind of problem to work through and to workshop to create something that was engaging, but still kind of, and then mindfulness, how much can you look at someone meditating on screen? So it was all of those things. But yeah, I mean, everything was kind of virtual. I think it allowed for us to tap into other communities and individuals that wouldn't typically show up to in person. And now we have, more in-person screenings, and we're seeing those folks kind of show up, and making those connections is really inspiring to see, like, this is actually working. Like, this is an impact film. People are getting together and looking to move this forward and make change, essentially progress. Like, that's really what the goal is, to like shift the dial a little bit over to, we need to do more and work towards changing the circumstance here.
Nice. Wow, you both shared a wealth of information, and I know there's probably someone, watching this like, well, I love this idea of impact producing. How do I get started as an impact producer? So, would you both mind sharing like some thoughts about if someone was interested in, being a future impact producer for either of you? How would they get started? How would they get connected to you?
That's a good question. I think, well, one, I think if you just want to be an impact producer in general, I think, like most things, there's two ways about it. You either just kind of start doing it at the level that you can, which in the beginning, honestly, is probably just finding other filmmakers in the area, finding projects that you're interested in, that you think you have access to those communities, or that you think you have good input around, and kind of offering to do it for free, because the vast majority of projects out there, do not have the money to hire you right now, which is a bummer if you're trying to eat and live. But the plus side is that it's not going to be too hard to start padding your resume and to start showing you have experience. So there is that. And I do think, if you have a background in any kind of event production in general, that really helps. If you don't, then, trial by fire, you kind of like learn by doing, and you see all the things that go wrong, and you make sure you don't do that next time. Impact producing is really similar to just producing in general. Your job is to like think about every little thing that can go wrong. Try to already be ahead of it. Try to, make the event the best it can be, be ready for people to, is someone going to get lost on the way there? Do they get the directions? Like, what's the room we're doing it in? Do they have enough outlets for everything we're bringing? Do we have all the equipment? If not, like, what are the things that people commonly forget? Like, let's make sure we have them on hand, so when they inevitably forget their dongle for their laptop, or they forget the little cord that goes to the speaker for their laptop, we already have that stuff, because that always happens every single time, But the other way to go about it is, to kind of just literally just Google like impact producers. To be honest, I don't know if there's a ton in the area. There are some, but there's certainly a lot in New York. And now with things being virtual, in some ways it kind of matters less. But literally just kind of, Googling around and saying like, just hitting up impact producers and saying like, hey, look, I want to learn. I'm willing to assist you on a project. Maybe I'll do the first one free just to get experience, to get to know you. So, if you want to take a risk on me, I can intern you, I can shadow you, and I can learn how to do this. And then maybe just let them know like, well, what is the community you're from? What are the places that you have inroads in? What are the topics that you know about? And chances are, somebody may have come to them with a project where like maybe they weren't a good fit, or maybe they, either you can fill in a hole that maybe they don't have themselves, or you can supplement something that they already do. I mean, you guys might totally align on something, in which case, like, you'd be a great assistant for them because you already kind of know. They don't have to explain a lot to you, you know. But I think those are probably the two surest roads. Yeah, you know, like anything else in the film world, it like sucks in the beginning for a while.
Right. And Nikki
Yeah.
has own experience, so
Yeah. So like I couldn't say how to become an impact producer. Like I'm an executive producer of this film, and what I would say is that, you know, on a macro level, what is, if you are an advocate, or if you feel like there's a story that needs to be told, something that it really, you know, doesn't have enough light being shown on it. You know, I think if you have that intention, you know, what I did was, you know, I reached out to, you know, through my network of people, say, oh, you know, you need to talk to this person. She's a producer, you know, wrap your brain around what that means. And like, I spent some time talking with her and getting like an idea of like, well, I have to create a mini treatment. I have to get a deck, and I have to do this. So, you know, starting there and then kind of learning what you need to do to create this thing is, I think, the first step. But you really have to be very clear on what your intention is. What is your goal of this? And if it's a strong enough, powerful story, you know, I think things will align. And, you know, so for example, like this film has now started something else within the district, where now these groups and these organizations it's something that's never been seen before in the district, where the district is completely transparent and bringing in the community to say, help us shift the paradigm of education here. Let's do something differently than what has been done in the past. And one of the advocates kind of is their initiative is this Blue Ribbon Initiative, right? So they want to now shift their schools, change their schools to become Blue Ribbon schools in Chester, which is a lofty goal. But now there could be an influx of money. There could be this change in school funding. So it's not impossible. So now, you know, this is another kind of part of this. Like if we were to create another film to follow this, there's also a sense of accountability in that district. So now they kind of have to follow through. So for me, it's just kind of like finding these stories that I think will not just help movement on a hyper local level in that area, but can help to illuminate and other like neighboring districts to also see what's happening, so it can inspire others. So I don't know if that fully answered like how to become an impact producer, but for me, it's just the story and then finding a way to tell that story.
yeah. And I'm thinking myself, you know, as an impact producer, you probably have to lead from passion and interest, and you know, having a connection with the topic of the film or series. It shouldn't be sought after from a point of view of, you know, I just want to get connected. You know, I feel like you really have to have something invested in that topic to want to put in the work that's required of an impact producer.
And I
So
think people feel that, right? So if you're showing up in a community and you have that passion about something and you're saying, this is really what I want to do, they'll resonate with that, and they'll feel that. And if you're authentic and you know, they know that, they see it, it becomes clear, and then things will just organically kind of open up and happen. Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
So we're winding down, and I can say, like, I thoroughly enjoyed being a part of this panel. You guys are both amazing in the work that you do, and I'm excited for, you know, all the communities that will come into contact with your work and learn so much more and want to do more in their communities. So tell me, what is next? Is there going to be like a follow up episode for Philly DA, or is it going to be like a follow up for, you know, your film, Nikki? And is Sergio, you're going to have to edit this part for your film, Divided Attention, when the children who need the most receive the least. So let me say that question again. So what's next? Is there going to be a follow up for Philly DA? You know, is there going to be like just another episode or a special episode that talks about what has happened after the series ran the first time? And for Nikki, for you, for Divided Attention, is there going to be like a part two? Will we learn more about children and their needs and see what has happened since you first put out your film? And Eva can start.
Sure. I would say there's nothing, no special episodes or anything that are likely to happen for Philly DA. there's been a lot of discussions about things that, if they were to happen, would be like ways in the future. But as of right now, I'd say there's nothing concrete, so probably not. But yeah, I'm already working on a new project that kind of looks at different issues. Kind of looks at a lot of issues around disability rights. And so I'm working with some phenomenal people, some old friends, on a new project that kind of looks at those issues. And that's probably about as much as I can say about it right now. But yeah, but it's exciting to kind of, get into a new world. And yeah, it's a new world that, like, I knew a little bit about from, personal experience, but a ton that I had no idea about. And so it's been very educational for me. And thankfully, working alongside some really wonderful people who this is their world, who have been very gracious with me and, given me space to kind of learn and catch up. So yeah, it's been a great process.
Yeah, for me, nothing formally established as far as what we're working on, but I am looking to possibly create a follow up, right? To follow up what has happened and transpired in Chester. The folks there, have said that Chester is, like a petri dish, the perfect laboratory to show like what can be done in communities that have just been, devastated financially and have been historically kind of underfunded. And to see how this can shift. So I am interested in that story. I am working on possibly securing some funds for that to see if we can get back in there and do another film and or a little mini series about what that looks like in Chester. So hopefully maybe me putting it out there and saying it out loud, putting it on the ethos will kind of manifest that. But yes, that's what I'd like to continue to do, and we'll see what happens.
You really should, because it sounds like this film is already like making a lot of noise in the community and creating some change. So it would be nice to just see what happened, what the follow up was about that. And also, so now that we got all that stuff out the way, right? What are some of the things that you've learned from doing your docuseries and your documentary? Like, and what are some things you intend to focus on that may be different the next go round? So for your newer projects, what would you do different? Nikki, you can start.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I had mentioned before, because this was a brand new experience for us, we kind of, I had this intention and some loosely worded goals, but things shifted, right? So initially it was going to be about the school to prison pipeline, very clearly how disability is overrepresented in that pipeline. And because of the content that we were receiving from our interviews and what we were able to access during COVID, it kind of shifted a little bit into, and what was happening, right? It was charterization, privatization, so things shifted. So we were very flexible about that. So it was a good thing that we were kind of open with our overall intention and goals. But for this next project, I am really coming up with a very, very clear impact kind of campaign right at the outset, instead of letting that kind of evolve and develop as we go along. Hopefully to secure more funding, to have more time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say for me, I mean, I think what I learned from the last go round was, to be more consciously thinking about impact kind of from the beginning. It was something that kind of evolved over time, like, oh yeah, like at some point maybe we think about that, but to always have that kind of like in the back of your head as you're going forward, as you're meeting people, as you're talking to them, bringing it up early, getting people's ideas early while you're just meeting them, when you're starting to film, because somebody may have a great idea early on that might have been impossible to implement if it came down the line, but if you heard it early enough, you might be able to actually get things together to actually do that. And so I think that's something that that is happening differently on this new project. And I think like just something in general, I think something that was really nice about like kind of getting back in person for some of the events that we did was just such a good reminder about how much of a difference that makes when you're in the same room with people. I think there really is just the act of people sitting together and watching something and talking about it in person, I don't know. It just feels different than virtual. It just feels like we're having a shared experience. We're seeing each other. We're almost like kind of starting relationships with each other, even though we might not see each other again. But there were certainly people at the screening, so we're trading numbers, we're trading contact info, and that happens when you have that ability to just kind of be there. I mean, in some ways, it kind of reminded me that it's almost a reason to to just remember that movie theaters and shared community screenings and things where people come together are not just for selling tickets and buying popcorn. It's it really is a communal experience. It really is something that gets you to hang out with your neighbors in a way that you wouldn't. It gets you to sit next to them. It gets you to have a human experience with them. And I think you kind of can't, it's easy to take for granted how important that is and how much that simple acts can do. And so, fostering as much of that as possible next time. I'm really hoping that, we can do more of that.
Nice. So before we leave, do you have any words of wisdom or advice for those who are watching this and, they're inspired and they're ready to get out there and go? What would you like to tell them, Ted?
I mean, I guess I would say go do it at the level that you can do it. Just go do it. With a lot of things, it's how do I become a filmmaker? Go make a movie, and then you're a filmmaker now. That's it. Go organize an event. You're an event organizer. Go do a screening. You're a screening organizer. It can be that simple, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. You can start really small. And the skills that you learn by doing this stuff, they're really transferable. If you can learn how to put together an event screening series, that skill set translates right to producing. So it's going to make you a better filmmaker. It's going to make you better at getting stories told. It's going to make you better at a whole number of jobs. Honestly, it's a really valuable skill set to have. Learning how to problem solve, learning how to organize a whole bunch of people and different moving parts to make a thing happen. It's very transferable skill. And yeah, I guess I would say to just go do it, and not worrying about it being big enough or flashy enough or having enough money. And because there's other people who you'll figure out are excited about it too. And a lot of times people just need to see another person doing it, and then they'll want to maybe come and help, and they'll want to be a part of it. And then you get bigger with other people, so yeah.
Totally. And Nikki, for you?
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Ted is saying. You just have to get out there and do it. But from part of my film is about mindfulness, contemplative practices, and as I think for producers or individuals, people of color who have grown up in different circumstances, that they have a lot of trauma. Oftentimes it's difficult to make that first step and to get out of your head. So meditation and contemplative practice is critical. So I literally every day kind of have to have a moment, 10 minutes in the morning, to start off to meditate. And during the making of this film, it was help me to make a film help me to create a film that makes impact in the community. Help me to help the children of Chilstrap. And that was literally what I did every day. And as you set that intention and you just give yourself that space, and give yourself, have some compassion for yourself and any of the challenges. If you face barriers, if you get told no, it is not that don't let that stop you, right? Talk to yourself as you would talk to a stranger. You got this, keep going, is probably what I would say.
Awesome. So Ted Paston, Nikki Mendez, thank you both so much for sharing your time, your knowledge with us. We really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to seeing what's next from the both of you. If I can get the words. That's where my nervousness comes in. But yes, thank you so much. I learned a wealth of knowledge as well, listening to both of you talk and just thinking about impact producing and how impactful it is for communities to have their voices heard too in your projects. And both of you did that. So amazing to me. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having us.